If I wasn't handsome now, it would be too late, you know. My name is John Ackerley, and I'm an alcoholic. And I am enthusiastic about this program. I'm very grateful for this way of life. It's terrific. And I like to thank the committee for the invitation, and Karen has written 3 letters to keep in touch with what's going on here. And I like to thank you for your hospitality. And like Seattle means a lot to me. I have been here 6 times over the years, and I feel so much at home here. Like Karen said, I was invited to the International here 15 years ago, and I was asked to speak in the afternoon at 3 o'clock. There was about 4,000 people in a couple of other rooms where with TV on, and it was some afternoon. And then I was asked to speak at the main meeting at Saturday night at 8 o'clock, and there was a terrific Al-Anon speaker and an Al-Anon speaker on, and so that was something else. A couple of years later, I was invited to speak for the Young People's International Convention here 2 years later. And you know, like old people like myself, and these young people ask us to speak on Saturday night. It's a privilege galore, and it is something special when there is no age difference in Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. It really is something else. And so I was very happy to come here. And Friday night, Magdalena, the Al-Anon speaker, and Vicky, the AA speaker, it blew me away. I like to take this opportunity, and then this morning, the promises, and Leslie, I mean, such a fantastic, strong program, I must compliment the committee for the kind of speakers that they have invited here. I hope I don't screw up tonight, but that it's impossible to come from that point to this point. But that is what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon is all about. Magdalena, you were super. I tell you, I met my wife Karen in Stockholm right after the war, Second World War, not the first one. And I was 24 and very sophisticated, But we have been married for 58 years. And it was nip and tuck a few times, And she wanted to have a divorce a few times. And I said to her, Karen, I can't afford a divorce. I said, we have 4 kids to bring up. What the hell? You find some clown somewhere and I find somebody else? And what about the kids? And I said, why don't you and I shape up? And she got a good sponsor in Al-Anon, and I had a good sponsor in AA. And after 7 years of sobriety, we fell in love again. And it has never got old. We still sleep together. uh, you know, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, our kids were 6 and 8 and 10 and 13 years old. And little Katrina was 8 years old when I came in, and next week she will celebrate 21 years of sobriety. And she's married to a mad Russian, and he has 31 years of sobriety. And my wife and we weren't really that pleased with that Russian. You know, my wife, he was a drug addict, you know. And Karen and I want to have a full-blown alcoholic, you know. But he has turned out to be a real prince. You know, he's a grumpy guy. And we were up there visiting where they live in Montana, and they have 2 children, and they weren't afraid of him at all. They were climbing all over him. And I said, look at this. You know, they have been married all these years, and they are crazy about one another. And both of them are active in AA, Katrina and Ken both, and they are something else. Our son was 6 years old when I came in, and he was stoned from 8 to midnight for 4 years when he went through Laguna Beach High School. I mean, he was really stoned, you know. He sat on that uphill in Laguna Beach and smoked pot and coke and other drugs and looked in the mirror. He said, "What's going on, man?" In May this year, he had been off that thing for 26 years. And we overpaid. But you know, Magdalena, it's tough when the kids get in trouble. We all know it. And Karen, you know, she was fantastic. She said, "Johnny, we have to get out of the way. We cannot promote this thing. We have to give them the right to be right or the right to be wrong, and we cannot interfere in God's timetable." And he said, we have to allow them to hang themselves and do their thing. And he said, God took care of us, he will take care of them too. And she said, you never came into AA until it was absolutely necessary. And so I heard, you know. And it's a beautiful thing. You know, let us face it. I have a lot of friends in this room. I love very much. You have never seen me before. In a very short while, you will know me very intimately. And that's just one of the neat things that happens in the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, that we can know each other on that level. You know, it can't be helped. You know, old like myself, I tell you, we lived in Laguna Beach for 35 years. 25 years ago, we lived next to Chuck and Elsa Chamberlain. So we had a wonderful environment for the come to program, you know. Elsa started an Al-Anon meeting 48 years ago in her home. Karen goes to that same meeting every Monday for the 42 years. You know, I go to the meeting. Well, Chuck, it's 58 years old. It's a fantastic meeting. I have that meeting in my home group, and I have a men's stag meeting on Monday. There's over 120 people every Monday, and there's a groovy program, you know, like that you feeling about your home group, you know. It's a beautiful thing. But it can't, you know, Jesus. So then we lived there for 35 years, and then we had to move away from there, And so we bought a condominium in Laguna Woods. It's only 4 miles inland. So we maintained the same meetings all the time. And, and isn't that something, I'm 83 years old and I have a 30-year loan. The guy who approved the loan, if he would take an honest inventory, he would realize that optimism is one of his defects of character. And Bo, I love you guys. He's great people in Al-Anon. I'm your greatest supporter. If it wasn't for Al-Anon, I wouldn't be alive today. Because I could not stop drinking either. No way. I can't be helped. You're all my age group, and you come into these rooms. Some old timers says, "Oh, him again," And so it goes. A few years ago, I was invited to Flagstaff on a convention. And the guy who invited me is old like myself. And I asked him, I said, you invited me here 7 years ago, 11 years ago, 19 years ago, and 27 years ago. I said, why do you invite me again? He said, Yanni, I wanted to hear you one more time before you die. It was funny then. Besides that, I'm probably the most famous substitute speaker on the West Coast. Started long ago. Sometimes the circuit speakers are invited to 2 different locations the same weekend. Dr. Paul, you call him, God rest his soul. He was only a year sober, but he was already a circuit speaker. And he was invited to Vancouver, Canada, and to Hawaii the same weekend. And Max, his dear wife, God rest her soul, my wife Karen was her sponsor for many years. But Max wanted to go to Hawaii. He said, why don't we send Jan to Vancouver? So that was my first big deal, I came up to Vancouver. Guy named Corky Berg picked me up at the airport and took me to the hotel. There were 4,500 people at the conference. It was a big deal, And we are standing there fine the afternoon in the lobby of the hotel where everything was going on. And a lady came up to Corky and said, hi, how are you? He said, I'm really good, how are you? And she said, you don't remember me, do you? And he said, sure, honey, but I'm rather busy with this gentleman right now. So she left. And I said, Corky, she wanted to talk to you. You don't have to babysit me. Everybody are friendly. I said, for God's sake, go and talk to her. He left, came back 10 minutes later, said, that's the damnedest thing I have ever run into. I said, what happened, Corky? He said, I came over there and said, hi, how are you? And she just looked at me and said, you don't remember me, do you? He said, sure, honey, what meeting did I meet you at? She said, for God's sake, man, I was your second wife, A little bit of a blackout, I suppose. I talk to newcomers. I love the feelings in these rooms with our newcomers. And I really like to be a newcomer myself. I like to remember when I was 2 weeks sober. And I came home after a meeting and I laid out, something is going on in these rooms. I hope I never forget that feeling. And it's still with me. And I hope I never forget the last year I drank, because I compromised on everything I believed in and stood for. I couldn't live or function without alcohol. I didn't dare to go to sleep if I didn't have a whiskey in the refrigerator, because I had a habit when I woke up. And if I ran out of booze at midnight, I usually called an associate of mine in Baldwin Park and said, Harold, next week you will owe me $150 on this particular job. But if you give me $20 tonight, you won't have to pay me the $130 next week. And I drove a 100-mile round trip at midnight to pick up $20. I didn't dare to buy any booze in Baldwin Park, because then I wouldn't make it home. When I came home to Anaheim, where we lived at the time, I bought a fifth of Imperial Bourbon for $4.85. And then I was safe, and I had to live like that, and I hope I never forget that period in my life. You know, and many people don't have a chance like you and I have. You know, as far as I'm concerned, we are the lucky ones. For the record, my grandfather died from alcoholic delirium, 1910. He lived in a 2,000-acre place outside Stockholm. They were breeding race horses, exquisite people. He died from alcoholic delirium. My father had a problem with his liver in 1927, and nobody knew anything about this illness then. He was a giant of a man. He radiated vitality. Women adored him. Men envied him. He died 3 years later, and he only weighed 130 pounds when he died. He didn't want to die at all, and he didn't have much of a chance. I was 8 years old then. And you know, it's something to see a beautiful human being like he once was. He was 6'2", and when he touched you, you realized his strength. But in 3 years, he had deteriorated to absolutely nothingness. My father was an aristocrat. He was vain and proud and arrogant. But he was also a very loving person. But there was some violence. Magdalena, this program have helped me do that thing, you know. This violence in homes. You know, that's why Children of Alcoholics started, you know. And 99 out of 100 meetings I go to, we finish with the Lord's Prayer. And there's a line that says, forgiven as I forgive those who trespass against me. And I assure you, there was stuff in my inventory I wish I could be forgiven about. And then we can't have two standards here. I'm supposed to be forgiven. I'm supposed to have an opportunity for a new life. But anybody that did something to me, justice for them or whatever you want to call it, it's an important point. Because if we don't address this issue, we will come in as victims, and we will remain victims, and it will interfere with our own recovery, and that's why I bring it up. You know. My older brother didn't have much of a chance for another reason. He had a little bit of pride, and it seems to be a commodity. We can't afford a luxury in this outfit. More than 20 years ago now, he lived in a castle outside Stockholm, married to a very beautiful girl. In fact, he married my girlfriend. I had a little bit of problem with that for a while, but and now I'm glad he did, you know. But he drank like I drank, and he blew it all. For 18 years he defended his right to drink. It is something to see, this insidious denial, you know. This guy earned 150 grand a year, spoke 6 languages fluently, carried a Swedish flag in the Olympics on 3 occasions. 18 years, he lived in a room that cost $15 a month to live in, drank a fifth of whiskey every night, and has lived in the past, and there was nothing ever wrong with him. I tried to 12-step him a few times. I wrote him a letter, page and a half what I used to be like, and 3.5 pages about all the wonders that had happened to me since I joined the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a postcard back. Said, "Dear John, I'm sorry to hear about all your problems." So much for identification. All the wonders that happened to me was just a plain headache to him, I flew back to Stockholm in 1978 because I was trying to help him. And he was very nervous. And I came off the plane down in Stockholm, and he looked at me and thought I was going to tear him apart or something. And it was only 1.5 years, 1 year and 9 months difference between us. But I said, an alcoholic has only 2 problems. And he said, "What are those supposed to be?" I said, "He either gets too much or too little." Then he relaxed, And we sat, he had his room for $15 a month. He had lived there for 14 years at the time. If we sat there in that room and I said, "Why don't you go back to work?" He said, "That bitch ain't going to get a dime from me." He lived in this castle, made all that money. My mother's best friend who grew up with when she was a child was Dag Hammarskjöld. But they were neighbors. They had a summer home next to one another. Fantastic human being. And he invited my brother. He spoke 6 languages fluently, graduated from 3 universities. He said, "No, I don't want to work." I said, "Look, you have lived in this goddamn cubbyhole." That was a steel bunk that he slept in, a little mattress this thick, and a 2-foot closet, and a table, and a window. And I said, "Look, she lives still in the castle with your kids, and you are living in this goddamn place. What's the matter with you?" And he said, "You don't understand. I'm a very humble person." Talk about arrogance. I invited him out here. He came here with me for a month. I took him to AA meetings. He met all our friends down in Laguna Beach and Monarch Beach in that area, And one night after the Wednesday night meeting, Lynn Wilder, many of you know him, speaks all the time all over the country here. Lynn invited us to his home. There was about 140 people at that party. And he gave my brother a tall highball glass of scotch, And there was about 22 young women in AA, from 22 to 32, And they were fascinated by this guy. He's 6'4", dark and mysterious. And they were up there rubbing up against him, And they thought, "Oh, what a fascinating guy, I mean, what's the matter with you picking these guys, Huh? Well, and he had the time of his life. And the night before he should fly back to Sweden again, I said, "What do you think about this? You don't understand." He said, "I don't want to quit. It's the only thing that's real in my life. When I sit down, drink by myself, and remember when I was on top of everything." And I said, "I understand." He flew him. He died 11 months later in the prime of his life. It was my older brother. My younger brother has gone through scripts twice in La Jolla 30 years ago. They told him, "Carl, your liver is shot. You can't drink booze anymore." He was there 6 months later, went through the same thing again. "Your liver is shot. You can't." He's still drinking. You want to hear something? You don't know how many times that I have prayed to God that my younger brother is 7 years younger than I am, that he would find his way. I said one time, "Why don't you go to me to a few meetings?" And his wife and him said, "We will never give you that satisfaction." Yeah. And and he's still drinking. 30 years ago, his liver was shot. And you know what happened here that I tell you that give me the goosebumps? Katrina, our youngest daughter, when she sat up there in Montana drinking every day. Well, I'm an Al-Anon and I can drink, you know. And Ken, her husband, said, you are drunk every goddamn night and I can't handle it anymore. You know. And Katrina sat down and she said, you know, I sat down thinking it was 11 o'clock at night. If I defend my drinking like my Uncle Carl for over 20 years, I will lose my marriage, I will never have any children. And she went over to the phone and called a girl in AA, and I said, this is Katrina, I drink every day, will you help me? And she hasn't had a drink since. She's 21 years sober today. Now here's my younger brother. Now I pray, please let him see it. He was the one that motivated her. We never knew, do we? You know. Now we have to get into this. See? So you and I are the lucky ones. You know, I didn't start to drink until 1952. You know, when my father died, I promised my grandmother I was never going to drink, so I didn't drink. And I really I needed a drink long before I started to drink. You know, I had a real problem with my father dying so soon, you know. So I was employed by this door factory in Alhambra, and my boss was alcoholic and he wanted to have somebody to drink with. And you know, it was very hard. I came to this country in 1948, carrying, and so I've been here longer than most people, you know. But you know, and so then it was hard to get a job. If you didn't have a citizen, you couldn't get what was a government contract. So I got this job as a salesman for this door factory. And so I started to drink with him, and the strangest thing happened. From day one, I drank a fifth of booze a day. For 2 years, I was never drunk, never hungover. I just felt good. There's something wrong with your system. You can drink that much liquor and not get in trouble. I had an enormous capacity. And my emotional being, you know, boy, this is something else, you know. You know, it's something, I mean, I had it. My whole family died from this goddamn thing, you know. And so I drank, and you know, the first 3 years it was fantastic. And after 3 years, it was a daily deal. Karen tried to prove I was alcoholic, and I tried to prove to her I was not. And it was something else. First time she came and said, you know, if you don't stop drinking, I go back to Sweden. I said, please, Karen, don't do this to me. You have no idea how well I'm doing, you know. You know. So then she comes a few months later and said, if you don't stop drinking, you have to move out. So I stopped drinking. And then the first phenomenon about that thing, I'm on the wagon for 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, everything is worse. We scream at each other. We, you know, carried on accusing one another. And I said, you know, I haven't had a goddamn drink for 2 weeks. It's not the booze. We just don't get along. And I took a drink and I said, why haven't I denied myself this pleasure for so long? It's crazy. It's not the booze. Well, now this goes on for 2 years. Then every time I stopped drinking, I got the shakes. You know, I worked full time. I'm in the building business. And so then I can't go and see the developers shaking like this. Then I started to discover that if I had a double shot of whiskey, I stopped the shakes, I could work and I worked like mad at it. Then this is the solution. Then I have to calm myself why I have to have a couple of drinks all the time. You know. And now we are in full bloom, you know. Everything was about alcoholism. Conversation, everything around my house. It was all about, every day was about the booze. And I talked to her. I said, you know, I think I have to go down to the supermarket and buy a loaf of bread and a fifth of milk. One night we stopped in front of Al's party pantry that I bought my evening supply. And I said to her, it was in July, 90 degrees or better. There was an old guy in an overcoat, and he had a brown paper bag in his hand. I said, do you see that guy over there with a brown paper bag? And she said, what about that man in the brown paper bag? I said, he is an alcoholic. She said, how do you know that? I said, every day I'm here, he is here. I had no clue what I was committing myself to. The next phenomena, stop drinking, I stopped drinking. And it was 3 days later, I sat straight up in my bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, and this big white snake came out of the wall. I never saw anything like it in my life. He came right out of the wall. He was snow white, had 3 black eyes. He was this big in diameter, on his fastest body. He was 23 feet long. He came slowly out of the wall and down and started to crawl toward me, And I sat down and looked at the goddamn thing, And I said, I haven't had a drink for 3 days, so it can't be the booze. My experience with the snake was this. He came right up and right in front of my face and started to hiss at me. Tongue dangling like this, I could even smell him. Kind of a Peralta, sweet, moisturized smell. He smelled like death. And I said to myself, I haven't had a drink for 3 days. It can't be the booze. And my experience with the snake was this. The closer he came, the more I screamed. And the screams in my head were such a crescendo that eventually my brain exploded from my own screams. And then I fell backwards unconscious. That was my experience. Karen told me in the morning, she said something strange happened this morning around 4 o'clock. She said you sat straight up, looked in front of you for quite a while. And then you said, ee. It's really a trip and a half. The third time that happened, I said to her, I said, this only happens when I stop drinking. I will never, ever stop drinking again, And the first few years when I drank, it was fabulous. When Clancy says about us, a couple of shots of whiskey alters my perception to reality. The world is a little friendlier when I have a few drinks. It was exactly how it was for me. I came home after work, out and calling on the big developers. And I took a hot bath, and came home and I poured myself a big jig of dry martinis, 4 to 1. And I climbed in that tub, and I lay down in that tub and I smoked that camel and I drank that martini and I spit out the pimento, And I said, boy, this is really class, I came in, I drank around the clock. One of the biggest developers out in S&S Construction, thousands of homes every year, Chappelle and Chappelle. They had a main office in Los Angeles on Wilshire Boulevard, And I came in there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was the first guy to manufacture pre-hung door openings. And, the funny thing was, I worked for that company for a year, and I had sold so many doors, they gave me 1/3 of the stock of the company. I was really a success story. And I come into Mr. Chappelle down Wilshire Boulevard. He sat there behind his big desk, lion feet and all that, you know, and a fabulous office on Wilshire Boulevard. And he sat there, what an interesting concept, you know. I said, you know, Mr. Chappelle, I think that we Jews, we should stick together. He said, I didn't know you were Jewish. I said, right now I am, you know. And he just laughed and signed a contract for $300,000 and get the hell out of here and give me good service, you know. It was a joke, the whole deal, you know. I had a ball. Well, so then after the snake business, next fantastic thing was that one night I'd made love to Karen when she wasn't even there. And that's kind of tricky, you know. She was laying 2 feet away from me there. She said, what are you doing over there? And I said, I beg your pardon? And when she realized what was going on, she started to laugh at me. And I started to cry. I felt it was so humiliating to laugh at the guy who was doing his best, you know. In the morning, I had been out in the kitchen and had my codeine, cough medicine, and my whiskey, and she met me in the hallway. And she said, well, good morning, lover boy. I didn't feel any pain. I just smiled at her. I said, that's the best peace I've had in a long time. Well, needless to say, I love the laughters in Alcoholics Anonymous. To me, that in itself is a spiritual experience. Anything that you and I laugh about here was really the most tragic thing that when it happened to us. But when you and I in this manner of identification, when it comes to this insanity, this denial, can just laugh about the whole mess, it makes it possible for us to forgive ourselves and change. And it is very much part of the recovery program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, we started over many times. Every time I had the best of intention, and every time it got worse, you know. I tried other things before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. We went to church all the time, and you know, Sunday mornings, you know, I wanted to drink. And she took kids to the church, you know, and so she left there and drove down the street from home. And I ran out down the street after her in my pajamas, you know. So she saw me there in the rearview mirror, you know, and so she stopped, rolled down the window and said, "What's the matter with you?" I said, "Don't forget to pray for me," you know. Another time said, what the hell is the matter with you? I said, I just want to be with you guys, you know. And I'm standing in my pajamas down a block away, a block and a half from my home, you know. So we go to this minister. He counseled me for 1.5 years. And he said one time, you have to ask God to help you. And I said, Walter, you're a good man, I'm not. You don't talk to your wife the way I talk to mine when she bugs me about my drinking. God doesn't want to have anything to do with me. I tried it. And then he read a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find out how he could best help me, and he realized that him and I lacked identification. and that I had to find my bottom further down alone. He even suggested a program of Alcoholics. I had no idea what Alcoholics Anonymous, what it meant. When he wouldn't talk to me anymore, I went to a psychiatrist in Santa Ana. I spent $2,000 with this doctor. There wasn't anything he said to me that Karen didn't tell me for free 3 times a day. There wasn't anything he said to me either that wasn't the truth. Every time he said was the truth. One time he stood down and looked at me and said, "Jon, you know what's wrong with you?" And I said, "Tell me, Doc." And he told it all my secrets and all my emotional problems. And I said, "Doctor, you're absolutely right. And that's why I drink. I can't stand myself the way I'm put together." You know. And so it went. 2 days before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was Sunday morning at 10 o'clock in Anaheim. I was picked up at Thrifty Mart trying to steal a pint of liquor for $3.57. And you should have seen me then. I was drunken and shaven, weighed 246 pounds. I couldn't even defend myself. And I was a son of a bitch. Next day I came into my best account in Anaheim. Secretary there, Helen, she said, "You know, I saw you in the market yesterday." It was my best account. I just said a 4-letter word and walked out of it. I didn't even bother to defend my... There was nothing left. 2 days later, Karen stood down and looked at me and she said, "Johnny, for years because of the children we have stayed together, but now because of them we have to part. And either you go down and try that thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, or you have to move out again." And I'd been kicked out before. I went down to that Laguna club in Anaheim because I didn't want to be kicked out. There was a lovely lady behind a coffee bar named Josephine, and she was in her 70s, and she said, "Do you have a drinking problem?" I said, "No. I get along as famously with it. Can you do something for my wife? She is crazy." And you know, I'll tell you another thing. Had I known how sick I was when I came in, I would never have stayed. Because stopping drinking wouldn't have fixed that. And what I'm talking about is by the grace of God. Vicky and Leslie and all of us here. Had we known how bad it was, we would never have stayed. Many of us would have done something much more drastic. But there's a line in the big book that says more will be revealed. And thank God for that line, and by the grace of God, it happened to me the next day. I got out of the bed, I went out. And you know, this last 2 years I drank. You know, before I could drink 24 hours a day and no problem. And then I started to get sick the last 2 years. So I discovered codeine cough medicine. So I drank 2 half pints of codeine cough medicine every day, 2 3/5 of whiskey every day, and 6 anisines 4 times a day, and I was absolutely weird. You know. The last 10 months I drank, I couldn't get drunk, I couldn't get sober. There was no relief. It was just a son of a bitch, you know. So I went out there in the kitchen, you know, and I drank my codeine cough medicine so my stomach would come down, and then I drove down to the Laguna club in Anaheim, polished off a pint of Seagull 7 on my way down, come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there was a bunch of guys that had a cup of coffee before they went to work. And I said, "Please call my wife and tell her I'm here already." Then I proceeded to tell them why I couldn't be alcoholic. You know, I live in a beautiful home with a swimming pool. I have 3 automobiles and an English bulldog. I have a dapple gray Arabian horse down the block that I ride every afternoon. I play a little music. I fantasize a little bit. That sure as hell can't be alcoholism. And there was one guy who said that son of a bitch will never make it, you know. And then I went out and had 4 double martinis for lunch and came back, and I said, "Please call my wife and tell her I am here for the second time to show how sincere I was." And then what happened is this. There was this guy, he had listened to me all morning. He didn't say a word. And there's a pamphlet here that says, The Members' Eye View of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alan McGuinness was a screenwriter, and he wrote that. And in that, among other things, he said this: the first miracle in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is this, that wherever you and I go for help, they always say, do you know what's wrong with you? The first miracle of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, when a newcomer come in, he said, hey, you know what was wrong with me, and this is what I have done about it, and welcome, come on in, have a cup of coffee or home. And we don't put the newcomer on the defensive right away. And you know, that's what happened to me that afternoon. And I tell you something, I had done the best I knew all my life, and it still beat me in every area of my life. It really is a tragedy. And this Charlie Vick was his name. He sat down, you know, and he said, Johnny, why don't you come home with me and let us talk? I said, okay. It was so pathetic, you know. And we sit in his patio and he tells me his story. And that's what I think is important in Alcoholics Anonymous. One drunk talking to another. The identification between the two. And when he was true, I realized he was worse than I was. And he depended more than I did on it. And he was sober. And I said, Charlie, you were really that bad and you don't have to drink no more? And he said, I said, you don't understand. When I stop drinking, I get the shakes. And I have these weird things happening when that goddamn snake's chasing me around the room. I said, that's what happened to me when I stopped drinking. And he said, Johnny, you will only shake for 4 or 5 days. Then you don't ever have to shake again as long as you live. And then I broke, and I said, please show me what to do. I was in a meeting that night when they read portion of chapter 5 that we heard here this evening. I just said, please God help me today to stay sober. And it wasn't a big deal. You know, I always thought the spiritual experience would be something like, yes, John, what can I do for you, you know. It wasn't like that at all. It was merely a feeling. And my thoughts were these, that perhaps after all this stays away from me too. When I came home that night, I said to Karen, I said, you know, it happened to me tonight. I don't have to drink anymore. She said, your eyes look different. I haven't had to drink alcohol, any codeine, cough medicine, or strange pills, or funny cigarettes since that day. And it's 42 years and 9 months and 22 days ago today. You know, I was not a great success when I came into AA. I had a lot of anxieties about my kids. I wanted to be a good father. I knew I wasn't most of the time. I had $36,000 worth of unpaid bills. And it was a mess. And Karen had a suicide attempt 2 years prior. I came into AA because we were in Palm Springs to start over, and she thought I didn't love her anymore, and wanted out and didn't know how to say it. And that wasn't how it was at all, you know. And it's a terrifying thing when you realize that you are broken and not a human being spirit. And I had a debt to deal with. I had 10 days of sobriety. I said, I feel so goddamn guilty. That was an old timer said, the reason you feel so guilty is because you're guilty. And then I realized it's the truth. But you know, then I came to the conclusion that no matter what, I can't drink anymore. That is what happens here. When we can accept how we are and what we are, if we are defending where we are, like my older brother did, and my younger brother does, nothing can happen to us. So then we deal with that a day at a time. And you know, so then after me, but no matter what, I can't drink anymore. The meeting stopped and we had the Lord's Prayer. And I stood down and I regret, why did I cop out and admitted that it was my fault, you know. And then we wonder how getting higher power into our life. How can that happen here? I'm standing there alone and resenting that I had copped out. At least, I wish I hadn't said that. Then this guy walks up to me. I never saw him before. He comes over and put his arm around me and said, Johnny, everything is going to be all right. And I believed him. And that's how it began for me with higher power. It's incredible. I had 60 days of sobriety. And those days when we had 60 days of sobriety, or when we had, right after the meeting, we said, hey, come home with me and let us have a cup of coffee and a Coke and talk a little more after the meeting. So I had 60 days. So I said, why don't you guys come home to me and have a cup of coffee and a Coke and talk a little more? So they came home to my home. And what Fred said and what Janet said, wasn't that terrific? Jesus Christ, you know, God, wasn't that a wonderful meeting? Then Karen came out with a cardboard box this big and put it on the living room table. And that was where all those $36,000 worth of bills were, you know. And she said, you know, I know that you guys are absolutely freaking terrific. But what in the hell are we going to do with these? And one guy went over there and he looked, he said, Johnny, they can't kill you and they can't eat you. I said, Karen, did you hear that? They can't kill me and they can't eat me, you know. Then my sponsor stood down and looked and he said, Johnny, you got to go to work. I said, you mean without nothing? I said, yeah, you will. I can't do it, Charlie. I was so scared. 8 o'clock the next morning, the ring on the doorbell, it's Charlie. He said, come on, we are going. I said, what are you talking? We are going to go to work. And you know what he did? He drove down to Dykstra and Drake, that apartment builder, where Ellen was, you know, that had seen me stealing, got in caught for stealing that pint of liquor at Thrifty Mart. I hadn't even dared to tell Charlie about that I was a common thief. You know, I thought if I tell him, he might fire me, you know. And he drove right down there, and he said, go in there and give them a, please, Charlie. He said, get your ass in there and give them a bid. So I go in, and there's Ellen sitting behind her desk, and she looked disgusted. I said, Helen, may I give you a bid? I said, over there in the corner. So I went over there. There were 2 8-unit apartment buildings, frames, jams, doors, waters, finished lumber, and so on. Took it all off. And then I went over to her desk, and I said, Helen, thank you for letting me give you a bid. And you know what happened? Just blows me away. Her face changed, you know. And she said, oh my God, John, you aren't drinking anymore. And I said, Ellen, I have 60 days. And she said, Johnny, I have a brother-in-law. He has 2 years on the program. You're going to be okay now. So I come outside. I was Charlie sitting in my car. And I said, God damn it, I gave them a bid, you know. And he said, let's go down to the club and have a cup of coffee. So I'm down there. Oh, yeah, mugs then those days, and not styrofoam cups. And I stood down with my mug, and I said, I gave them a bid. And he said, let us do it again. I said, what are you talking about? I said, come on. And we made 2 calls in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the morning, 3 in the... Charlie stayed with me for 90 days. And until I had enough courage in me that I could work on my own again. Blows my mind, you know. They say we go to hell and back for you if you stay sober. I had 6 months of sobriety. And I'm up early, I go to work. And you know, it was a very cold household. And you know that I came when I meditated those nights, I lay down and said, at least I'm doing this right. At least I'm doing this. I'm not drinking, you know. So I'm 6 months sober. And I go to work, and Karen meets me in the hallway and said, Before you have a boosters or cuts, now you have those goddamn meetings. Are you that kind of a weakling you can't stand on your own 2 feet? And I said, I suppose so. And then I go out and work all day and come home at 5:15, and I had 25 phone calls about the people I owed the money to. I had no money yet. I had no income yet. And so I called my sponsor, Charlie. And I said, Charlie, they want my money. And he said, no, they want their money. He said, you know. So I tell you what I did. I went on a budget. I worked very hard. I went to a meeting every day. I stayed sober every day. It took me 3.5 years to pay back that $36,000. I bought money almost twice a month. And when I was through that, there was no resentment because I bought my freedom. And those financial amends was a very important part of my program. It's important to all of us. We heard it today already about our financial 40,000, you know. Well, so that night I had a quick bite to eat. I go to my meeting. I have a reprieve here for an hour and a half. And then I come home. I'm supposed to thank God for my sobriety that day. And I said, God, what a terrible day I have had. What an absolutely terrifying day I have. And I said, yeah, but I didn't drink. And I said, what's going on? I used to get drunk over a lot less. And then it begins, because then we start to realize that this thing called sobriety, it's mine, it's my own, it's the only decent thing that has happened to me in a long time. It must be some sort of a gift or something. And then begins a consistency in our living, and then we add to it. And from now on, everything is God's business, good and bad. And if God is part of the bad stuff is just a period within a period. And when we have gone through that period, we realize why we had to go through, and it all starts to make sense to us. So this thing called sobriety, that's the big deal here. Many people say, when will my ship come in? This is the ship. You know. So now my sobriety is right. My AA life is good. My work starts to go better. The kids come home from school and say, hi, Dad, can we talk? Now the kids are in play. Every day you and I stay sober, life is getting better in spite of us. And there have been days in my life, in my sobriety, the only thing that was right that day was that I didn't drink that day. It's worthwhile to fight for. Don't give up before the miracle happens. It took 3 years of sobriety before Karen realized I meant business. In the last 4 years I drank, I was in the wagon several times, and every time we get to be friends, I always went back to drink. So she didn't dare to believe I was going to stay sober. And you know, you and I, they don't know what's going on here. We hope that they are going to believe us, but I understood she didn't dare to believe it. Besides that, there's things that are going on between you and me in these rooms. You're doing fine, John. Hang in, that's going to get better. And we have this whole support group here. We don't have to go through nothing alone anymore. It's incredible. 3 years later, she comes and says to me, Johnny, it wasn't always your fault. I said, now I can die, you know. Long ago. She said, you know, this life we live today is really the most fabulous adventure. It was so hopeless and so tragic. It completely turned around. There's even a degree of innocence between us today. And that's almost impossible to believe. But that has come to pass because she is just as busy in Al-Anon as I'm in AA. We have seen so many people over the years have turned around and started to be good to one another. Nothing is in vain. All that bad stuff that you and I had to cost them will benefit somebody else down the line, so don't even worry about it. Just take care of your own sobriety. The best amends we can make to them is to say sober a day at a time. The rest of the program will follow little by little, but we've got to start somewhere. Now, you know, today we have these addicts, alcoholics, you know. It's everybody are duly addicted today. And you know, the funny thing is, the heroin addict doesn't identify with the people on coke. The people on coke feel superior to alcoholics for one reason or another. Maybe the price tag have a little bit of snob appeal, I don't know. They say if I had a program like Alcoholics Anonymous, Coke Anonymous, Narcotics, I have a lot of credibility, help a lot of people. But what's wrong with us? Why is it only 1 out of 10 of us that have a consistent sobriety? It's like cancer said, my case is different. I'm not really like them. And that's how it is. We are really not like them. And you know, and what is the difference? An addict is trying to get out of reality. You and I are trying to fit into reality. Recovery program is the same. Total abstinence, 12 steps, and sponsorship. And I have watched you addicts now for over 40 years, and you don't seem to drink a hell of a lot better than we did. You know? So join what you're supposed to join. You can't beat this rap, you know. And you know, so now here are the other 12 steps. You know, the first, I didn't want to take my inventory. Charlie said, you got to take your inventory. I said, it means nothing, Charlie. It means nothing. And he said, if you don't take your inventory, you ain't going to stay sober. So I got there, I'm going to prove to you it means nothing. So I had that bad attitude, and I wrote my inventory. Then I called him, and I said, I've taken my inventory. And he said, come on down, we'll take the 5th step. Okay, I'll show you. So come down, and I read my inventory about 55 minutes, you know. And the strangest thing happened when I had read my inventory to him. I had a feeling I never thought I would ever have. But my feeling was this: I have fulfilled the contract for sobriety. I don't have to worry about getting drunk again. I never counted on that. Another thing that I hadn't counted on, I had a deep feeling that God had forgiven me for all the things I took Karen through. I never counted on that. And there's a healing here that's incredible, you know. And you know, there's another thing is we always feel different. We take, comes happen down, and one night when we take the 10th and 11th step, there is this clarity. I'm just like they are, and they are just like I am. And if they can do it, I can. And I'm part of something instead of being different. That's a gift in itself. But of course, that is the name of the game. I'm different. That's you know, we come that we are just like they are, and they are. And it's a free competitive deal. It's a fair deal. You know, it's just as tough for them as it is for me. And that happens in the 10th and 11th step. And now I'm going to share the worst thing we have. You know, it's 10 after 9, and if you will give me about 10 minutes more, is that okay? Okay. You know, I don't want you to miss out on anything. You know that old timers, they get really buggy when you go overtime. I have a friend in Glendale. His name is Bob Lemke. He's a full-blooded German, and I had a little problem with the Germans during the war. You know, he was 12 years sober. I was invited to speak at his birthday in Glendale. He's a great AA. He speaks funny. I mean, he's born in this country, has more of an accent than I have. He must practice every night or something, you know. And you know, he's one of those guys you can't save any souls after 10, buddy. And you know, I'm up there, he had his 12th birthday. And it was 10 o'clock and a minute and a half to wrap up my story. And he sat back down at the exit door, and he shouts at 10 o'clock and said, "John, for God's sake, it's 10. I said, "Lemke, this is only an AA meeting. We ain't marching into Poland tonight." The worst thing we have to deal with in sobriety is resentment. And I had a resentment against my older brother because he hated me with a passion. There's only a year and 9 months difference between us. But I never understood why. When he was 12 years old, he was over 6 feet tall. He was enormous. I was no match for him. He used to punch me out. I rolled under the dining room table, pretended I had fainted so he wouldn't hit me anymore. I was no match for him, you know. He was brilliant in school. He was an A student in everything. He had a photographic mind, and he ridiculed me. I had no confidence in myself at all. He absolutely broke my spirit. And I could never figure out why he hated me so much. You know, when he was 15 years old and I was 13. He was a water polo player. He drowned me, you know, in 15 feet depth out in the ocean. Held me under till I heard my father's voice talking to me from the other side. It's a terrifying thing to drown. When you can't breathe and you inhale water, you think your head is going to explode. And I hung there suspended. I couldn't even move a limb. And, you know, why does he hate me so much? You know, when I came to, I was up at the sun deck and coughed out the water. And why does he hate me so much? And then I'm dealing with my resentment in Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, I'm some sort of a second-class citizen because I've joined that goddamn AA. Everybody just walk over me, and I said, I forgive you and I love you, no big deal. There must be something more to that. And I prayed out at night at 11 o'clock, and I said, please, God, give me a sign. And it was just like a film. You know, when we were little, I was 3 years old and he was 5 years old. And our father favored me. You know, when I was 3 years old, I was absolutely adorable. I was a beautiful little guy, you know, golden blonde hair, and you know, and my father used to take me up in the arm and hug me and kiss me. And my older brother was obese, even he was not the lap baby. And I could see his eyes, what about me? And I realized that's the whole deal. I was in the way. He is so serious and he is such an introvert and he needed more love than I did. And I was in the way, and I thought, how can I straighten this terrible thing out between us? You know? And then I started to realize that night, my brother had one obsession in his life, and that was to get the approval from our father, that he was a good guy. And you know, when he became into high school and college, he took gymnastics 7 days a week. And from being an obese guy, 6'4", almost 300 pounds, he became one of the finest athletes in Sweden. He carried a Swedish flag in the Olympics 3 times. He was in gymnastics, 6'4" in gymnastics. Can you imagine what what it must have been? And he lived in a castle just like my father grew up in, you know. And you know, and I thought, oh my God. He just wants the approval from our dad, and he can't get it because he died when he was 9. And I said, how can I? The next day I got a letter from my older brother. I hadn't heard from him for 15 years. And paragraph for paragraph what I was thinking the night before. You know, when we were 12 and we were trying to glorify our father's name, what a great man he was. This is what I have done. What he had accomplished all this to just please our father. I just wrote this little note. I said, dear Bertie, if our father would have been alive today, he would have taken us in arms and said, you have succeeded beyond my greatest expectations, your loving brother John. And I mail it, and I have never had a resentment since. And you know, and you understand one thing. I didn't say to him, I have forgiven you for drowning me. I didn't play God. He maybe couldn't have handled that. I just made amends to him how I had interfered in his life. And I is a step that talks about it, except when to do so would injure them or others. So, you know, after that, my brother wrote me every 60 days for the rest of his life. You know. I tried to help him, and he didn't want to stop drinking, but we were friends, and he wrote me every 60 days what was going on with him, and he died in the prime of his life from alcoholism. But that, we became friends there for all those years in the end. You know, it was a beautiful thing. So, and the God business. You know, the carpenter man said, you know, God is life. God is life. Life itself, you and me breathing in and out. Nobody can dispute life. And you and I need a power greater than ourselves. So, there are two powers, good and bad, right or wrong, good or evil, God or the devil, And I believe this, that myself and ego and evil is one power. And God, or God is life. Life itself, to me, is God's Spirit within us. And our God's Spirit within us and our soul and our conscience is one of the same thing. That's the other power. And the more educated and sensitive and tutored our conscience is, the closer to God will be. And those are the two powers. God never tests us. We were created in His image, they said, But He gave us this. He gave power of choice, or freedom of choice. And you and I, we can choose right or wrong, good or bad. That is what will make life interesting for the rest of our life. And nobody can dispute life. Like Alan McInnes said, even an atheist, after a year of sobriety, gets a little more spiritual. He said, thank God I'm still an atheist, So, Chuck Chamberlain taught me all this thing. That was how he believed it, and I really, all this thing that only makes sense. So God's Spirit within us, our soul and conscience, one day will leave this dimension and go into another dimension, or from one room into another, and we continue His search for us, and so on and so forth, etc., etc. It's a beautiful thing. And then we come finally to this. What is it that's going on in these rooms? It's called love with no conditions. Love with no conditions. You and I can be who we are and what we are, and in spite of it we are loved. There is nothing like it on the face of this earth. And then this ism we have. It makes us belong. We belong to one another. There is a sense of belonging in these rooms at times is haunting. It's a fact and reality. Alone we cannot do it, but together we can. I tell you something how I was. I never fitted in out there. I could never be part of it. If I wasn't the center of attention, I wouldn't even play. I always wished I was somebody else, Now, what is it? How is it that you and I, we can sit in a stadium with 84,000 people and feel alone? Why am I different? And you know what it is? You and I, we overfeel in all directions. If I feel bad, I feel really bad. If I feel good, I feel I'm better than Jesus Christ, Nothing in between, And now we have this program of ours, the 12 Steps, the 12th Edition sponsorship. It's the finest formula for living designed by man, And the medical profession is the number one kilosecond contributor to sanity, and all of you bear the couple of obsession and mind and a spiritual malady, and there is no cure. The mental thing, the physical will be it for the rest of the day. The only thing we can deal with is the mental thing. And you and I have this program, and you and I, so many of us, thanks to this way of life, we live out there, we fit in, we are part of, we have a purpose for living. Many of us will have the worst sickness is this country. It's the number one kilosecond contributor to insanity. That's what you and I are dealing with. We live out there like we don't have the illness. Tell that to a guy who have heart and cancer or not a fatal disease. You and I, nobody have the breaks that you and I have. Nobody have the breaks. We are no victims. You and I have an opportunity because of this program to live life on life's terms, Nobody have the breaks that you and I have. So then we come down finally to this. Anybody new here, if you can just believe we only wish you well and we only want good things for you, if you can just believe that and take that with you, you will never wake up lonely anymore, because by now there's a way to go and to live. And then we come down to what AA is all about. Abstinence. abstaining from. Abstinence is a spiritual environment. It isn't natural for alcoholics not to drink. But as long as you and I have abstinence, we have a chance. And we sit here in these rooms and we cannot help but we identify. Right on, exactly what he said, what she said. Jesus Christ, ain't that something, you know. And then they call identification. But then there's something even more deep than that. It's called moments of clarity. Moments of clarity. And we have the 10th and 11th step. Why was I so lucky that I saw it and grabbed and ran with it? Why didn't my brothers? They needed it as much as I did. How many people have you and I tried the 12 step? They don't want what we got. It's incredible. And then they come, you know, here we are. 7 meetings a week the first year, 5 meetings ever since. You know, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, there were 600,000 sober members. Today, 2 million a week goes to AA meetings in 145 countries. It's the fastest growing spiritual movements in time began since Jesus Christ. No religion, no spiritual program had grown in 70 years at such speed as Alcoholics Anonymous. This formula for living, you know, it's a truth, it's a fact. You know. So I said, so here we have this fantastic thing, and then our mind at times, I don't want to go to a meeting tonight. I can't stand to listen to that goddamn chapter 5 another time. I have it up to my giggy. You know. And still I go. And then I sit down in that meeting and I hear precisely what I needed to hear. God, was I lucky that I was here. If I hadn't been here, I hadn't heard it. I'd missed out on that thing. Thank God I was here. And then that's what happens in that meeting. And you see, ladies and gentlemen, the moments of clarity in Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, that's the music in these rooms. And you all knew, do this, do what we do. Don't drink and come to meetings. It's the best deal in town. Thank you.